Fine. Go. So Rock Creek Conservancy is the philanthropic and stewardship partner of Rock Creek Park. And with our partners at Rock Creek Park, we are the managers of the Race History and Rock Creek program, of which this, Jazz and the Carter Barron, is our latest installment. We are also the home to the Carter Barron Alliance, which is working hard to ensure that the Carter Barron reopens in a timely fashion and in a way that is true to its historic ideals of inclusion, a diversity of performances, as well as a sense of welcoming inclusion and economic access. And we are delighted that our moderator tonight, Sunny Sumter, is a member of our Carter Barron Alliance Steering Committee. Before I turn things over to her, however, I want to give a moment to give the floor, the proverbial floor, if you will, to Brian Joyner, who is the acting superintendent of Rock Creek Park, so the de facto manager of the Carter Barron Amphitheater, to give us a welcome on behalf of the park, as well as a little update on what's happening with the Carter Barron Amphitheater. Brian?
Thank you, Jeannie. So welcome everyone to Race History in Rock Creek. I am excited about this discussion this evening, but you didn't come here to hear me talk. So let me give you a quick update on Carter Barron, where we are with our attempts to rehabilitate the building. We are well into our schematic design phase right now. We anticipate being done with that, all things being equal, by the late spring of this coming year, 2024, thanks to our friends in the Carter Barron Alliance, and specifically Rock Creek Conservancy. Once we do that, we should be able to hit the ground running, as it were, toward construction documents, with the goal of getting into the queue for the National Park Service for funding, potentially as early as 2026. So that we can put a shovel in the ground just in time for the 250th anniversary of our nation's Declaration of Independence. So exciting news there. We will be sharing more as we have more information to share with everyone. And I turn it back over to you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Brian. And for everyone who's eager to hear those updates by joining us this evening, we will make sure that you get our monthly Carter Barron Alliance newsletter, which has updates as they are available. You also did not come to hear me tonight. You came to hear some of our jazz greats. So I am going to turn things over to our moderator and collaborator for the evening, Sunny Sumter. We were really excited to be able to present this program in collaboration with DC Jazz Fest. Sunny is the president and CEO of DC Jazz Fest. She is a native Washingtonian and, as I understand it, Carter Barron regular back when it was open, an alumna of Howard University, and she has so many awards that I don't think I could list them all right now. So I am going to turn the floor over to Sunny with our gratitude for your discussion this evening and enthusiasm to see you and Jazz Fest come to the Carter Barron someday. And just a quick reminder to everyone, the panel will have its discussion for a while. Please do feel free to add questions to the chat that we can then share when the panel is ready for the Q&A portion of the evening. Thanks so much, Sunny.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to Brian and the Rock Creek Conservancy and the National Park Service for hosting these. This is one of several. This panel is about jazz. At the Carter Barron, something that is so near and dear, a life mission of mine. And I'm so delighted to have with me some of my dearest friends in this music that have been doing it long before I have. So I'd first like to introduce Bill Warrell. You may know Bill if you checked out DC Space, because he owned and operated DC Space for many years, brought some of the finest artists, including jazz artists, right here to DC. In addition, you may know him because he was head of DC Curators that used to produce a jazz festival right here in the nation's capital at Freedom Plaza, and also did Jazz Arts, of which he did some of the programming right at the Carter Barron, which he'll tell you all about in a minute. I'd also like to introduce my friend Warren Shad. Warren is the manufacturer and owner of Shad Pianos, which is not only the official piano of the DC Jazz Fest, but the only Black American piano manufacturer in the world. And guess where you can find his piano? At the Vatican, in other places, but we love Warren for all that he is here in DC. He will tell you about some of his fantastic performances as a drummer. He wears so many hats at the Carter Barron back in the day. And then I want to give a heads up. We all know Bob Israel. He used to be the guy helping out with Blues Alley. Also he was a phenomenal, pianist and had his own group.
Bone player.
The jazz bone player. Why did I say piano? I'm having amnesia, but yes, bone player. And he had his own group called the Jazz Battalions, the Washington Jazz Battalions, which he'll tell you all about as well. But he was also a performer at the Carter Barron and a consultant to Al Dale, who used to do quite a bit of the programming at the Carter Barron back in the day. So why don't we go ahead and kick things off? Because I'm ready to hear these amazing contributors, these luminaries, contributed to cultural warriors to the jazz scene in DC, talk about what it was like to have jazz at the Carter Barron. I think it's important to share a couple of things. One, we know that the Carter Barron stopped doing music around 2016. We know that it had been doing jazz for decades through summer series and fall series and all kinds of things throughout, even before I was even old enough to really perform the music myself. I used to remember going with my parents. I had family that lived on Delafield, and we used to walk on over to the Carter Barron when I was 6 and 7 years old, and used to just party and hang out with my family there. So what a delight it is to just come full circle and talk about it. So I'm going to start with the significance of the Carter Barron Amphitheater. We know where it is on 16th Street, Gold Coast area. What was the significance of it on the local jazz scene in DC? And gentlemen, when you talk, I want you to get period on me. I want you to talk about the years, because we know there's a stretch here. And I'm going to start with Bill. Bill, talk to us about when you were a presenter doing art, doing jazz at the Carter Barron Amphitheater, and what that experience was like for you as a presenter of this great music.
Well, the festival that we had developed on Freedom Plaza had a solid audience, but certainly not. I mean, we were lucky if we did 4,000 people, and the Carter Barron was always, to me, was a venue that was something really special for families. It was something that was really special being outdoors. I mean, when I first went there was no Wolf Trap. There was no Meriwether Post Pavilion. I mean, the closest thing we had to that kind of venue was Carter Barron, and you were in the woods. And quite frankly, I felt the times I presented and worked there, I felt more like I was in the forest than I ever have at those other venues I've mentioned. It's just something about the trees wrapping around, and that's all you could see from your seats. But knowing that you were right on, one of the main arteries of the city. So it had this kind of magic of being able to bring people from everywhere. And because of the park itself and its significance in the region, people gravitated to the park, and they knew that there was this venue. This is long before tennis started coming there. And I remember going on a couple of occasions where we just went there to picnic, and there was music going on, and we didn't even go in. But my one in particular, somebody's got to correct me. I think it was Basie. My mom, when I was a preteen or a young teenager, took me to see Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald together. And I can't remember whether it was there or it was out in Gaithersburg at the Shady Grove Amphitheater. Those were the two venues.
Yeah, they went to Shady. I know they played Shady Grove. I saw Ella there. I also saw the Basie. Yeah. I can't remember if they were together, though. I remember that show, though.
Yeah. Well, one of them was at Carter Barron, and one of them was there.
Right.
It was at in Gaithersburg. But those were nothing but formative years for me. And I didn't actually get to work there until the end of the festival that we were doing, the last 3 years, which was in the late 90s. But for a venue that size, I really didn't do the kinds of things that would fill it. So I used the place more for its magic to create work. I had an opera residency there with Anne LeBaron, and where she rewrote the Orpheus and Eurydice story produced it totally here in Washington using very well-known Washington designers, set designers, January Mojo, who people probably know for costuming Sweet Honey and the Rock, and even doing some of Sun Ra's capes, did all the costuming. So it was a kind of place where people who were here in the community felt really comfortable spending their days working. And back then, I mean, it was not a union venue. The working with the Park Service, if you covered the cost of the guards and staying open, we could work there for 2 or 3 days. In one case, we were there for a week. Another project we did with Abdullah Ibrahim, the pianist had written a suite that he had never performed in the United States before, the Africa Suite. He had recorded it, and it was written for a full orchestra. And Carter Barron was the perfect spot to spend 3 days rehearsing the DC-based Urban Philharmonic, Gerald Hunt's orchestra. And it was magical. I mean, the weather, the atmosphere, the wind, everything that comes with that venue added to that performance that night.
That's wonderful, Bill. And I know you've got more to say, and we're going to let you hold there and come back to some of the other great art that you've presented there. I want to go now to Warren Shadd as a performer to talk about some of the fantastic bands you were in performing right at the Carter Barron.
Well, okay, so I played there many times with Shirley Horn, and also with Buck Hill, and Dick Morgan with Keter Betts, and Nancy Wilson, and with the Blues Alley Big Band, which was directed by, drum roll, Bob Israel. So Bob and I go way back, and
it's a couple of years,
Yeah, a couple of years, yeah, way back to like one year out of high school. So way back when we played in the Blues Alley Big Band. And it was a wonderful place to play. The sound quality was wonderful. The lighting was beautiful. The audience was, they came dressed to kill. It was a place that felt like it was exclusive and inclusive simultaneously. And I knew Al Dale as well, and his partner John Carrington that booked the venue, and yeah, it was just a wonderful place to play.
I'm sure it was doing something at Carter Barron with Nancy Wilson in the outdoor space there must have been absolutely lovely, and Shirley Horn, and I mean, what a tremendous memory that must have for you when you talk about it, the experiences of playing with both of those amazing jazz.
Yeah, the audience was very receptive. They came there to enjoy the music, and yeah, it'll be a great venue for a DC Jazz Festival coming up.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to go over to you now, Bob. If you can pull your screen down just a little bit so we can see a little bit more of you.
You really want to?
Just a little bit more. So right now, even your chin is being cut off. So would love to hear your experiences again, not only as a performer, Bob.
Yeah, well, I had,
but also as a consultant. Talk about that.
I had kind of dual roles because Al Dale was there, and by the time I got to Blues Alley, which was 1983, when I had my first when I first started working there, Al and I just through phone calls and what do you got going on? Who did what? What about this person? It was an ongoing conversation over, I'm going to say, 30 years or more with Al Dale. And even when he retired, we were always in touch. The conversation evolved into an unfortunate golf game where he beat me most of the time. But I wasn't a really good golfer, but I certainly was along for the ride. And it seemed like part of that crew was Al and me and Keter's daughter.
Keter Betts.
Yeah, Keter Betts, Freddie Cole, and on occasion Joe Williams. He played the club.
Great company.
Yeah, so that was quite the golf crowd. I wasn't going to miss out on that particular thing, believe me. But in terms of Carter Barron, like Warren said, I played there as the Washington Jazz Battalion, and then Blues Alley, because when I took over all the booking there and all the production and concert stuff, we changed the name of the band. It was bought from me from Washington Jazz Battalion to Blues Alley Big Band. And we performed there with Nancy 3 different times. We opened for Maynard and several other different sort of performances. We also, Al and I, he had wanted to do, we were doing Lonnie Liston Smith and Noel Pointer and Roy Ayers, and they ended up playing there.
Gene Carn,
right? All them. They ended up playing there.
And this must have been the 80s.
In the 80s. I started at Blues Alley in 83, but this ongoing sort of relationship with Al went on a very, very long time. And with Keeter, when his daughters were very young, I taught his daughters in summer camp and all this sort of thing. So all of us had this closer. And Keeter, I know, did educational programs, not only there at Carter Barron, but also at Wolf Trap and all over the place.
Yeah.
But the experience of playing Carter Barron and then just being there for different shows, whether it was Nancy or Gil Scott or Stanley Turrentine, it was usually with people that I was associated with, and Al had picked up and they were performing Carter Barron. So I was glad to. But one of the wildest things, I don't know if you remember this, Warren, but the first time we played with Nancy, the backstage area of the Carter Barron sort of extended out onto the backstage where you drive up. Mm-hmm. Nancy, she had rehearsed the band, or our bass player had, and we hadn't seen her yet, and probably place was packed. It was completely sold out. Probably I'm looking around wondering when she's going to show up and what was going to happen. But she was not there. Yeah. And then a limousine, of course, shows up, practically pulled up onto the stage, because you could do that there because of the way the stage was set up. And she pulls up, I'm looking over, and there she is. She gets out in all her
sparkle.
Yeah, and it was an incredible sparkle, to say the least. I was happy to have known her and her manager, John Levy, for so many years.
John Levy as well with Joe Williams.
Joe Williams, right. Yeah. So John didn't die until he was almost 100. And I remember talking to him, not because we'd, again, gotten on the phone, and the last show that Nancy did was at Strathmore, which I presented at Strathmore. But she showed up in the limousine, jumped out of the limousine, went to the front of the band, and boom, it was showtime. There was no rehearsal or anything with her. It was just, we'd already rehearsed the show, and she just showed up. And the crowd, of course, because it was sort of an intimate environment, to say the least. And Bill was right in pointing out that part of the magic was the fact that she could actually pull the limousine onto the stage, and you were surrounded in this in the park, which many of us who grew up in and around the park, have a lot of ideas about the park. But that with the front of the area and the crowds and the trees, it was actually like going to a national park anywhere else in the country. I've been to a lot of them, and being in one of the amphitheaters. So it was an intimate, wonderful place to perform and for performers to play. I can't remember anyone that I was associated ever turning or not wanting to play the Carter Barron. Right. It was like, that was a place where in DC, right, if you got a summer show there, that was a big thing. And then Al, of course, booked Fort DuPont, and a lot of the people where he could, and he didn't have to worry about clauses, exclusivity clauses, because he just booked both places, and I really didn't care because it didn't affect my schedule at Blues Alley.
Al would have a group at Carter Barron 1 week, and 3 weeks later it'd be the same act as Fort DuPont.
That's correct. That's right. That happened a lot. And then
Phyllis Hyman one day, and Phyllis Hyman 3 weeks later at the other.
Yeah, and then 3 or 4 months later, you'd see them Phyllis was another one, you'd see them at the club or somewhere else, right? So, and in particular, Blues Alley with Nancy, Phyllis, Sarah Vaughan, and quite a few others, McCoy. I think Mary Wilson played there also, Warren. I backed her up quite a few times, but I think that she played there too, not on jazz. I'll try to stay in jazz, but Tarantine I know did almost every single summer.
That's so great to hear that we had so many of the finest in jazz over 40-year period that it's come through the Carter Barron. Some of the names that you've mentioned are just luminaries and within the
I don't know if Sarah Vaughan played there, but I think she probably would have. Do you remember, Warren? I don't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't
remember. We have to get Brian or Jean to go back to the archives.
Yeah, so some of the archives would be interesting to see.
Yes. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about is this aspect of community with the Carter Barron. And we have, and oftentimes, as you just mentioned, because the National Park Service played such a central role, sometimes musicians would play at the Carter Barron and then they'd play at Fort DuPont. And so how do you think that really how did the Carter Barron actually distinguish itself? And you could put the Fort DuPont Park in there from other venues in the DC areas. And specifically, I'd love to hear more about how you think it impacted jazz musicians in DC in their performance at these.
Well, if you got a date at Carter Barron, that was like a serious jazz date.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like if you were working at Carter Barron, presenter, performer, however you were doing it, it was a step up. That was a step up, right? That was not playing a one step down or Blues Alley or any other venue. That was a 4,000 seat venue. I thought it was 5, but I guess I'm mistaken. But
almost a lot of cats wore tuxedos on that gig.
Yeah, I mean it was a serious endeavor there, and as I said, it had the history of the place expanded from there was ballet, the symphonies were there was all sorts of things there, and then this huge jazz programming and other programming was going on. Al was kind of instrumental in all that, and then the community, since it was right in the heart of the DC community, in our beautiful park, it was in the summertime, it was the place to be in terms of artists and presenters too. I mean, Al presented most of the stuff when I was there, so I was his sidekick, so to speak.
Well, I'm thinking about that. I know you were there quite a bit in the 80s. That whole run, and Warren, you performed in the 80s. Bill, I'd like to hear from you. I know you did some things in the mid 90s. Talk about the programming you did.
And certainly jazz based projects, but my organization was much more involved with edgier side of jazz on one hand, and also on the other hand, I was very much involved with the world of multidisciplinary performing arts. So a number of things that I commissioned that required a large deck, a big stage, or required an area off stage for an ensemble to play to support what was going on stage. I mean, there's a lot of things about Carter Barron that we're like going into the Warner Theater or to a hall in the Kennedy Center, except in the raw. I mean, it was very rough, and I was working there at a point where it needed a lot of improvement and wasn't being used as much. And as a result, I was able to talk the folks at the Park Service into, hey, I could make some really interesting things to be created there, not to be filling it, because certainly the kinds of things that I produced there never brought 4,000 people. The one exception was we did work with Carter Barron to help promote, I think it was Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, but that came close to selling out. Otherwise,
talk about the Lester Bowie project.
No, but then Lester, I was going to talk a bit about Lester's family, and Lester himself. Kind of, DC was his second city because his family was here, so he was coming here a lot. and he would stay. He could stay for a week or two at a time. We did a dance project with Lester doing the music with the New York Organ Ensemble, and it was a dance piece about the life and times of Josephine Baker, and it rehearsed in 2 or 3 different cities in the process. We came here, we never performed it for the public, but Carter Barron let us stay there for a week. So these dancers could have a full deck. So Lester's group could come in at the end there and perform live. We did something very similar over 3 years with 5 different commissioners around the country. This doesn't connect specifically to the jazz community here, except Don Pullen and his African-Brazilian connection and a troupe of Native American singers spent 3 years creating a magical musical score for Garth Fagan's dance, all set to jazz fusing with Native American music. And it premiered at Lincoln Center and 5 other cities. And Carter Barron was where we performed it, finished after those 3 years here in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, through all of it, Don was dying of lymphoma, and he passed. We performed the premiere in Montana, where the Indians were from. They came here, and he died the week before.
Wow.
And Dee Jackson, who had been Don's protege, filled in and played with the ensemble. But it was, it had an amazing feeling about the day, and Carter Barron added a lot to that. And I'll tell if this is the right moment, a side story where in the process of the performance, a butterfly started flying around up in the lights. You remember, you're out there in the wild and you're running these burning hot stage lights. And it kept flying around through the entire performance to a point where everybody in the audience was noticing. And then at one point, this butterfly got up too close to the lights and dropped, plummeted to the deck. And you could feel the kind of connection between nature and performing arts, and a kind of a gasp in the audience. And at the very end of this performance, the ensemble get up to take their bows, and this butterfly lifts up off the deck and starts flying around with the ensemble, and had not died at all, but had landed and waited through the performance for the encore. But Alan Kriegsman at the time wrote one of the most glowing reviews I think I've ever heard him or read him post in the Post, and he mentions the butterfly in the review, and mentions the fact that in Native American culture, the butterfly is the movement of the spirit. And it's one of those stories, but if it hadn't been at Carter Barron and hadn't been at the culmination of these 3 years, the magic wouldn't have quite been the same.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing that. I remember when I was in DC, and my mentor was Kevin Toney from the Blackbirds. He was the founding member of the Blackbirds, and we all know the song Rock Creek Park. Mm-hmm. And he used to play it all the time in his home. I used to babysit his son, Jason. And when I was younger, I used to go and see the Blackbirds at Carter Barron. In fact, he was supposed to be one of the panelists for this, but had a time conflict. And so one of the things I just really want to point out is I remember those performances, even, in the late 70s as a kid, going to see great jazz. And one of the things I think that the Carter Barron did, and I'd like for this group to really tackle this one, is the parallel between the jazz scene in DC and the Carter Barron and how they activated jazz performances, because we all know everything was at the Carter Barron. Every art form was there, all the multiple art disciplines were there. But there were some times, as Bob alluded to, when you had so many great performances in one summer. And I know for me, as being an artist of product of Howard University's Jazz Studies program, of really going through the seasons of jazz, since I started jazz in the 90s, that you saw a fluidity of when the Carter Barron did more jazz, depending on what was happening with jazz, this jazz scene here. So I'd love to hear, how was the jazz scene in the 70s and the 80s with this great art form that has now stood the test of time in 2023? How was it? How vibrant was it? What was the kind of jazz music that people were playing back then that made it so electric, where all the masses came out to hear this great music? And I'll let any of you take that one.
I think jazz back in the 70s, I think 70s was probably the greatest era of music ever. And because you think that it encompassed all of the different genres. I mean, for everything from disco to country to classical to fusion to straight ahead jazz to acid jazz to everything, to R&B to funk to rock. I mean, the works. So, but the type of jazz that I was playing a lot, was pretty much straight ahead and avant-garde, especially like with Andrew White.
Andrew played there a lot, didn't he?
Thanks for mentioning Andrew. Keep going.
Yeah, I did 4 albums with Andrew White and Steve Novosel and Donna Waters, and we did a lot of gigs like that, and we would turn out the place because people were so shocked when they would hear this music. It would just blow you back. I mean, from Andrew, and notwithstanding that Andrew had his wild outfits on, but his high water pants, and
one can never forget.
Yeah, exactly. He did that.
You had some outfits too that you showed me pictures of.
Oh, me?
It doesn't even look like
I fit right in, top hat and all that.
Right in.
Yeah, I fit right in. But that was some great music. And then you have the other side, which is more on the Oscar Peterson side, which I played a lot with Dick Morgan at that time, with Steve Novosel and Keter Betts and other bass players, Fred Williams and anyway, so these and Billy Taylor, bass player, if you knew him, not the pianist, so you had the full spectrum of jazz there from there were a lot of jazz singers at that time, male, especially female, especially a lot of female jazz singers locally as well, in all the jazz venues around here. It was a lot of that. It was
Ronnie Wells.
Ronnie Wells, yeah.
Yes,
Ronnie Wells, definitely. In fact, she performed with Dick Morgan Trio, I can't even think of her. Jessica Cleaves, who actually was the lead singer with Earth, Wind, and Fire, who sings "Keep Your Head to the Sky," that high voice, along with Philip Bailey. That's her, but she also is a jazz singer. Also, Phyllis Hyman was discovered by Dick Morgan in Vegas.
Yeah.
She was playing.
Ryan Warren, I didn't know that.
He was playing in Vegas. He had his Brazilian band, like Sergio Mendes 66, and she was one of the 2 girls that sang in the band. And then she came down here, and we did some gigs together with Dick Morgan. So it was a very vibrant jazz scene in the 70s, definitely.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, I was going to see jazz in the 70s, and yes, it was everywhere in all the schools, and there were multiple venues to go to. And then in the 80s, it was great. I mean, Freddie was around. I think he played Carter Barron too. And of course,
Freddie Hubbard.
I had Freddie, Nancy, Sarah, Dizzy Gillespie. He played the club, but I'm certain he played Carter Barron, because really just about, I mean, all the sort of mainstream jazz players that we had at the club also played the Carter Barron. Almost everybody. I mean, it wasn't the kind of thing where if they were playing, a summer date, I just, okay, I'll take it in October. How you do it in July or whatever. It was the community. There was no one like trying to compete with all the stuff like venues sometimes can do. So at least between Al and I, anyway. So there was a lot of music. Shows were well attended, the ones that I was involved with, and the venue was magic. And as I said, it'd be interesting to see all the different people that were actually jazz-wise there, because there was quite a few back back when I was involved, I mean, a lot of people played Carter Barron. They also, quite a few played Fort DuPont, which I don't think has had as big as capacity. Warren, do you remember?
Yeah, Fort DuPont, you know, people had their blankets and picnic baskets and beer. So it was kind of like, you know, it was just open, you know, so it wasn't really any type of seating capacity. I mean, I know I played there many times there as well, but I remember one time Flora Purim and Ayrton were playing there, and they broke out into this.
There she goes. They would play the club, and then they played.
Right.
Other venues,
like a little bit later, but I remember at Fort DuPont, they broke out into this serious vamp, and I was just standing there with my bicycle, and I was just going crazy. And I looked around the audience, and they were like Kentucky Fried Chicken, some beer. They were paying attention. I'm like, do you understand what's going on this stage? Oh my God, they're so killing it. That was amazing.
He was something. Both of them were something. Ayrton, when he would get rolling, man, it was serious.
It's amazing. They were absolutely amazing.
I can't believe Flora Purim that's really fantastic. I've never seen them live.
Oh my God!
That was a trip.
We're off topic though. That wasn't a Carter Barron.
Right? I know, but I just had to say that.
DuPont, if I recall.
Sometimes I wish I was born, you know, earlier in life.
So I think they played both venues actually. They did.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, my only thoughts related to the DC scene is that Carter Barron was more a place that probably influenced, especially when you talk about the 70s and the 80s. You know, I had this experience with a lot of the people I was bringing were not DC artists, and there are very few DC jazz artists that were playing at Carter Barron that would fill a venue of that size, but audiences included an entire generation or two or even three that grew up seeing things there and went on to make. I mean, I feel like DC is probably the richest it's been in 20 years currently because of the young people that grew up on Carter Barron or grew up on DC Space or grew up on Blues Alley. You know, that they became this generation of really strong players in DC. And most of the things that I did there incorporated DC artists in the process of making things, but they were not, you know, DC-based composers. Again, Lester's family was in this area, and he was in this area all the time, but he played there with Brass Fantasy. And I wanted it to be a slightly, because Brass Fantasy at the time was doing, Lester would curse me for saying this, they were doing cover tunes. They were doing really rowdy brass versions of the kind of music that was being played by pop artists at Carter Barron. And we double billed them because I felt a little uncomfortable about the fact that so few DC artists were on the events we were doing there. I booked Chuck Brown. And at the time, I can't remember who it was with the Park Service, but they said, well, we're really not doing go-go. And I said, well, Chuck doesn't want to do go-go. Chuck wants to bring his jazz quartet. And it was magical. The combination of Lester's Brass Fantasy and Chuck Brown's jazz quartet was absolutely a night of jazz. Carter Barron allowed for those kind of magical combinations to happen because the audiences that came there came from everywhere. I mean, I keep reiterating that, but it was what was so unique about Carter Barron. It was equally inviting to all quadrants of the city, and equally invited to people who went to the Kennedy Center or went to DAR Constitution Hall for classical music or for theater or for ballet. But it wasn't the mainstay. And the programming there was always I always thought it was very clever, because it's a difficult venue.
I completely agree. I love the programming at Carter Barron, and just to even look in the archives and see some of the programming that you've all talked about, to do that homework and to see some of the finest in the world, and with all art forms really stepping onto the Carter Barron grounds and performing. I know I had the great benefit, really in my singing career, of opening up for Phyllis Hyman. And that was just one of the highlights of my life as a young singer, to open up and then to see that great performer perform her magic on the Carter Barron stage. I want us to recognize, I see that our founder of the DC Jazz Fest is on the call, Claude Bailey. Hi, Claude. Claude was really responsible as on the board of directors for DC Jazz Festival for us presenting Edgar Castaneda, who's this amazing Colombian harpist, and then followed by Pancho Sanchez. I mean, that show was absolutely magical, since we're using the word magic throughout this panel. That was a fantastic show. And you saw DC came alive. That show was in 2013, and we blew up Carter Barron, right? Didn't we, Claude?
Yes, we did. Pancho's a great act.
He is a great act. And I'm just, that's when Ruth was, working as the coordinator with the National Park Service. So I think it's important to really talk about here. We've talked about the 70s, the 80s, all the way through the teens of, the 21st century of the Carter Barron. I know we can't wait for the Carter Barron to return so that our children and their children can appreciate that, that amphitheater. I mean, there's nothing like it in DC, I think, even as
it was a real stop it was on everybody's hit list of like what's going on there, what's going on, it could have been the Warner or any other venue, but I mean, it was definitely on the what's happening there this weekend.
Well, it was exciting just to go up 16th Street and see the billboard sitting out in front of 16th in Colorado, who's performing there. You say, wow, who's performing there? You look at the list and like, I'm getting my tickets right now. You got to go to the record store to get it, though. Go get you.
Yeah.
You got to go to the record store, Tower Records or somewhere to get some tickets.
Some of those
I know. Couldn't get it online. There was no Ticketmaster online.
We used to do a lot of stuff with record stores. I was constantly calling the record stores trying to find out about sales and this and that and the other. Yeah, record store. Tower did sell tickets, didn't they?
Yeah,
Tower sold tickets.
Goody Records and all those.
That's how we used to do shows, guys. Come on.
Yeah, no, it is.
Record store.
What was it? There was a record store down. There was one on DuPont Circle. There was another one in Georgetown. Got it. There was a
Camp Mill.
Huh?
Camp Mill, Melody Records.
No, it was a
Melody Records was on Connecticut Avenue by
you're right, it was Melody. I bought a lot of music at Melody at DuPont Circle.
Melody.
It was also Sam Goody.
That's right.
There were real big jazz guys in a few of those places that were always on top of what was going on.
And
I was in touch with quite a few of them.
I think I want to give a special shout out to Gloria Hightower and the Friends of the Carter Barron, because they really were so instrumental in so much of the fantastic programming at the Carter Barron as well. Were you going to say something, Warren?
No, I was just adding in there's just more record stores. Soul Shack on F Street.
Yes.
Oh, Soul Shack.
Blue Nile for us for a lot of stuff. I mean,
Soul Shack was the joint. They'd have the ones that had the speaker out front. You see people dancing out in front of the record stove. The record stove out in front of the record stove. And it'd be winter and guys would be out there dancing out in front of Soul Shack. That's pretty funny. But it's pretty cool though.
So, really in thinking about, again, this jazz at the Carter Barron, I want to talk about how, we talked a little bit about how the jazz music had changed over time at the Carter Barron. And we did mention, you brought up one of the questions about the lack of go-go. Go-go is now DC's, music. But at one point, you couldn't even perform go-go.
No, that was the word I got. We're not doing a go-go.
That's right. But then we saw that Chuck Brown band was there because why? Chuck really incorporated a lot of jazz in his music.
Yeah. He was initially
and that band was an acoustic band. I mean, it was electric, but it was a stand-up bass, and I mean, he was doing jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. Initially a jazz artist. I mean, he initially played with all the jazz standards, and some that he actually incorporated into go-go. Misty, and My Funny Valentine. There I go, there I go, there I go.
Don't mean a thing if it doesn't.
It don't mean a thing. That's right.
Don't mean a thing. I mean, he incorporated. So he says, okay, I'm gonna still play my jazz, but I'll still play to the audience too. Go.
And I think that has some real relevance, because Chuck really helped our casual fans of jazz music
Orpheus,
to really appreciate jazz.
Yeah, Orpheus.
So many members in my
Orpheus
family.
in Georgetown.
Right. Who was the character was in there? This guy, I was always in there talking to him. He's right around the corner. That guy was, I can't remember the name.
Are you talking about Christoph?
Christoph. Yeah,
yeah.
That guy, I was in there all the time talking to him, and he would say, "Man, you got to see this, Bob." And we were talking about it. So he was always telling me, and I go, "Well, who's coming in to buy? How many are you selling?" And he said, "Well, I sold, 300 or something like that." I said, "Well, that's a six-year winner." So we'd go on and on and on every week with him. Yeah, he was right. It was a bookstore and record store, Orpheus.
And I think that's a significance when you talk about the Carter Barron being part of the community.
Yeah.
The fact that you had to go into the bookstores, right? You had to go into the record stores to buy a Carter Barron ticket.
Yeah.
So it gave you an opportunity to really be present in your community in that way. So I love that the Carter Barron had that community aspect to it.
They were all involved with everything at the record stores and bookstores. You were always talking to them, always. At least
absolutely.
Ira Sabin had the record store up on
Ira had the one down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Right. Yeah. And Bill Brower at the time. Bill Brower was working there.
Bill Brower, he worked there. I think he worked at Orpheus too.
Because Ira was a jazz drummer.
Yeah.
Ira was a jazz drummer, so I heard.
Yeah.
And we brought up to the audience about Bill Brower, who we lost, who transitioned a few years ago. Bill Brower, award-winning producer, not only of jazz, but of just music and cultural presentation here in DC. But he put his stamp on jazz.
Mm-hmm. He was really, really important to me. I was always talking to Bill. I mean, he was sitting here talking. He said, "Well, he used to come in and we'd sit down and talk." I always go up and talk to him and find out what was coming out, what labels were doing what, and where these people were. It was an ongoing. Another one, weekly sort of conversation.
That's right. And Bill was interesting because he worked with Glenn Tapscott, and I know, Warren, you talked about Glenn. Glenn used to do all the sound in the AV at Carter Barron.
Correct.
It would have been nice to even have had Glenn on this call, because I'm sure he had some stories to tell.
Oh yeah.
About, his load in and load out with some of these amazing artists that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it was a great venue for that. It was a great venue for being relaxed. I mean, so many of the other venues in town were restricted by the unions. You could take your time. You could load in, you could load out. I got to say, we had a couple of people that cooked, made the food for the artists when we were working on these longer term projects. And that became kind of famous, that we go to Carter Barron, you're going to have some amazing food cooked right there backstage.
That's right.
I can get him one of those.
You got to give the shout out to the caterers.
I totally missed all that.
So I know the audience has some questions. I know you were going to put those in the chat. You can start to do that. We want to bring you into this conversation, because this really is a community conversation about jazz at the Carter Barron. We know that it's a community venue, that we had so many members in the Northwest community that brought their families generation after generation to this fantastic. It became a tradition for your families, we know. We'd love to hear. And as Jane just said, type your questions into the chat, and we'll go ahead and start asking some of those questions. We'll give you a moment.
Could I ask you a question, Sonny?
Sure.
In the meantime?
Yes.
Well, I'm curious, what did the DC Jazz Fest do at Carter Barron in terms of presenting before it closed? And
as I mentioned,
I want to know what you plan on doing once you get it open.
So one of the things
is clearly a success, but you need music at the other end of the town.
You're absolutely right. Well, we loved that show we did with Edmar Castaneda and Pancho. That was people talked about it for years. It was Edmar Castaneda is a jazz harpist from Colombia, and
I bet that was great.
It was fantastic. And then Pancho just brought
out there
all that percussion and all that great Latin music. And it was a party. People were up dancing. It was fantastic. So I really...
You ever do Eddie Palmieri?
We did Eddie Palmieri, but on the mall.
On the mall, okay.
And then we did him at...
That's
right. I didn't have time, so I was just wondering. Sort of Pancho also, both great artists.
You know, as the Jazz Festival is having such a great presence at the Wharf and then across DC, we still like to be in all neighborhoods. Right. The idea is when the Carter Barron comes back is to really have a big presence, so that we expand it, similar to what New Orleans does. Think about what New Orleans does, where when you go to NOLA, it's everywhere, right? Over 2 weeks. Yeah. That's the same aspiration that we have for our festival, for our DC Jazz Fest, for it to be everywhere. Over a 2-week period, Carter Barron being one of the places. So very excited about that. Have we started to put anything in the chat yet? I can't see.
Honey, we have a question that's not public in the chat. The question is, someone mentioned, I think it was Warren, was talking about the relationship between go-go and jazz, and if anyone can speak to how jazz informed go-go and other genres in DC music.
Good. I think I would say bottom line is that go-go is jazz. I mean, it's its own notion and its own form, but I've always maintained that Chuck's rhythms are perfectly in sync with the second line from New Orleans. It's that combination of Caribbean and jazz and that kind of hot backbeat that's almost identical. I mean, they are art forms that come out of jazz. There's no question.
Hey, Warren, I got a question for you about you. So did you work with Chuck? You were saying?
No, I didn't work with Chuck. I worked with some other go-go bands, but I could tell you, because I grew up at a time where go-go became really hot.
Right. Yeah, I remember when it did.
The difference there, there's a difference between the jazz and other forms of music, because I can tell you, even we were trying to, when drum machines became hot in the mid '80s, using a Linn drum or any of those kind of drum machines, there's a swing that go-go has that you could not get on a drum machine. You could not get it, and it sounded weird. It sounded crazy. So live drums and go-go was still hot at that time if you wanted it to sound right. But there's some go-go hits that were out in that time that it was a drum machine, and it just, I don't know, it was just not good.
Yeah, right.
It has
you're right.
Go-go has what it is, it's a tribal feel. It's a tribal. It's not American. It's straight out of Africa. And there's a swing there that cannot be duplicated with the machine. Machines have got a little bit more sophisticated, but depends on how you quantize it. But live drums and go-go, and it is somewhat similar to a shuffle, if you will, but not quite. If you tried to write it out, you would not be able to write it out like you're writing a shuffle. So, and I've had to replace some drummers on some Broadway shows where there were things like, oh, right here is just 16 bars out of an entire show of just go-go, and the drummer couldn't play it, so they called me to play the whole show because of 16 bars of go-go, because it's not R&B, it's not soul, it's not jazz, it's not shuffle, it's its own thing, but it's totally
You're right, it does. The shows that I saw, Chuck, in your description, it did sort of have this whole sort of jazz or swing sort of element in it. That's a good way of putting it. I think you're right about that. And you have to have,
but with the drumming. I mean, with the polyrhythm.
Yeah,
polyrhythms, but at the same time, there are other instruments. You can play just the drums and play go-go, but if you incorporate some other things that come out straight out of Africa, like the mini bongos, the mini congos, the cowbell is a star, and tambourine, and so you incorporate those particular those 5 elements, and you really have straight up go-go.
We did a Jazz Meets Go-Go during the festival this year, where we had the Brassaholics and the Jogo project on a panel discussion talking about the difference and really comparing second line to go-go and the slight variation, because like you said, Warren, it really is, there is nothing like the go-go swing. It's distinct, it's unique, and that's what makes it so incredibly powerful. And we have a lot of other artists that actually will put a go-go beat in their music because it is so distinctive. Mm-hmm. What I love about how jazz has been incorporated in go-go is that, you have a Chuck Brown that will take jazz tunes, like you mentioned, Misty, and don't mean it's a thing if it ain't got that go-go swing.
That was a big hit, that one.
Well, plus he's got a horn section.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, the horns, man. They had a rough gig. That was a rough gig.
It's just killing. It's just, I'll never forget the time when Chuck Brown performed at the DC Jazz Festival, where people had come to hear, they had never heard go-go before because they had come from other places in the world. Mm-hmm. And they were on their feet dancing as if they had heard the go-go, been listening to go-go all their lives. Mm-hmm. It was phenomenal.
Well, if I remember correctly, that day was when Chuck was standing in the wings listening to the Dirty Dozen.
That's right.
And they look at him and he goes, do you know? And he says, blah, blah. He goes, we know all your music. And he jumped in and played with them. It was magical.
The New Orleans musicians were giving them.
It was the Dirty Dozen with Chuck Brown. I wish the tapes had been rolling.
I wish that had happened. I represented them many times. What a great show that was. I can imagine that would have been fantastic. What a great thing.
Well, it inspired me to do a painting of it.
Another thing about go-go is that I know we're talking about these particular songs, but really it's the breakdown. And see, at one time it was trying to make a song and then have a breakdown in the middle of it, right? But then later on became the whole thing is a breakdown, and you might have a little bit of music in between there, and then you have a lot of the call and response.
Like for 45 minutes.
Yeah. Southeast is in the house. Anacostia is in the house. Bladensburg is in the house. So it's all that call and response. But really, even Chuck would not even play much of the guitar anymore. He became a percussion instrument because he played chuck, 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 chuck. It wasn't playing on ding, 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 ding. No. He became a percussive instrument right along with the rest of the band because it's all about that rhythm and not particularly about the ascending and the descending of notes. It's really not. To add in the horns is like that's cool. Okay, that's cool and all that. But you notice that as soon as the breakdown happens, that's when the people get excited.
Yeah, they're out on the floor.
I'm wondering if we have any other. Bob, we can continue. Bob,
this is another panel altogether.
We could stay on this topic for a long time.
Oh, yeah, this is a good
question? One. We are hoping to do a panel on go-go and the Carter Barron at some point, but tonight we had a question from the panel that I think will be easy for everyone, but this is also for you, Sonny, which is, what is your most memorable moment at the Carter Barron?
Okay, we're going to start with Warren.
Oh, I played with a lot of people there, but I think it's kind of a tie for me with Shirley Horn and the Blues Alley Big Band with Bob Israel, with Nancy Wilson. That was a great experience, being a diversified drummer to play in that type of venue, to be able to play with a big band and then go play with a trio there. It was a great venue to play. And again, like I said, musicians there, they knew when they played at the Carter Barron, we wore tuxedos because it was just the next.
It was the real deal. It really was.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a wonderful time playing at the Carter Barron. Absolutely.
Bob?
Oh, I think every moment that I was there as a performer or just as a bystander, like we were talking, like the last time I saw Gil, really was at the Carter Barron. He was coming down the driveway and up into the venue, and I met him out there. Was that your show, Sonny? That Gil Scott-Heron show?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you were there. You know what I'm talking about. He came down, he was there, and I don't know how I got there, but somehow or another, I mean, somebody invited me back there. But anyway, that was a good experience. And of course, playing with Nancy was a great thing. And I'll never forget her knowing the venue well enough to know that she could take the limousine literally onto the stage and get out and do her Nancy thing, which was incredible. I guess my favorite record of hers was Cannonball Adderley, and Nancy Wilson probably of all the things she ever did. But playing, she was just incredible vocalist. The place was jammed. We were there, and it was just a joyous moment to be in this venue playing with one of the world's greatest jazz vocalists. For me, it was really something else. So I would have to say, like Warren, that was one of the.
Was it for you?
Yeah.
What about you, Bill? What about you, Bill?
Well, I mean, it's got to be the repeat of the story I have already told about Don Pullen. We had worked for 3 years in this co-commission, and he had been to Washington 3 times in the process. We did rehearsals at UDC. He recorded the music with the Chief Cliff Singers, which is really in my opinion, the only great jazz Native American collaboration that's on record. And it was recorded at NPR. The next day they played out at Taste of DC, and then the next year the piece was finally finished. The dance was absolutely glorious that Garth Fagan had done. And it was that all of this had come together. And then that night, he had just passed. He was going the next day to play Lincoln Center out of doors, or they were going the next day to play Lincoln Center out of doors. So he was back to New York where he had lived. This was his service. It became a funeral, and everybody in the audience knew it. And then that butterfly incident just took it somewhere else.
Wow.
So
I knew you were going to bring that one up. That was pretty special. I think for me, I would have to say I was a little kid. I went with my family to see Earth, Wind, and Fire, Keep Your Head to the Sky, or Head to the Sky tour that they did. And my family was big Earth, Wind, and Fire fans. So it would be in the air all the time. And so I knew every word. Maybe it was 5 or 6. I can't remember. But I just remember dancing with my family and having a ball listening to Earth, Wind,
that must have been a great show.
It was great.
Love them. I know so much of their music. God, I listened to it all the time. I never got so tired of that.
No. Jane, do you have another question for us?
I do. This is the last one that I have now, so folks should please feel welcome to add more questions to the chat, either directly to me or to the group as a whole. But the next question is that that idea of the next generation of DC jazz musicians was brought up. So which up-and-coming jazz musician would you like to see play the Carter Barron when it reopens? And maybe I'll add to that, which is how could the Carter Barron help continue to foster future jazz musicians?
Warren, do you want to take that?
I think the continuation of a lot of the educational programs that you have, Sonny, that sort of bridges these kids that want to know about jazz or curious about jazz, and how to bring them in, and how to sort of bridge the gap between what they listen to on the radio, like trap music, and show them the similarities of trap music and how that it swings just like jazz. It's just a different art form, but how you can enjoy it. I think that'd be pretty good to continue that.
Bill?
Well, I've been somebody who's always looked to match whatever I'm presenting with a venue that has almost as much, for lack of a better term, magic as the music itself. Because when it's the venue and the music, all of a sudden the whole experience goes up a notch. And we did that with the Pension Building. We did that with Freedom Plaza. And Carter Barron was the perfect, spot for things to be created. And I'd like to see it do more, yes, in the way of jazz education, but as much, if not more, in the way of commissioning and fostering the creation of new works. A good example, last year, Janelle Leppin, the wonderful cellist who lives here in DC, created a piece of music with an outstanding ensemble, the Volcanic Ash Ensemble. And she spent 4 residencies at Rhizome creating what ended up being an hour and 10-hour, 20-minute evening work. And it was like going to see, Steve Reich and 18 musicians. It was one long composition. And the same sort of thing happened when Abdullah Ibrahim played his suite there. It is the perfect place to get lost in magnificent compositions. And I think it's a perfect spot to be a laboratory. And I know a 4,000 seat venue is never thought of as the proper place to be a laboratory. But if you don't make it a union hall, you don't make it real restrictive with the hours that you can work there, and you allow things to happen there because it exists. Let it happen. It exists. Don't treat it like a rental hall, or don't treat it like a venue that only should house things that fill it up, because 4,000 seats in the world of jazz is almost, it's a myth. There's so few things, unless you're creating an event like you do on the wharf, where there's a lot of music for the day and it's a destination. I don't know. Whatever the future is, there needs to be the magic. Maintain programs that
maintain the magic. How about you, Bob?
Oh, I was thinking of some of my former students. Mark Carey is one. He when he joined, I was directing the Blues Alley Youth Orchestra at the time. They were using my big band library, and Mark, I used to go pick him up and bring him to rehearsal. Another person who was in that band was Frankie Addison. He's a wonderful alto player, and I think his brother. And there's a trombone player. I can't remember his name. And I'm looking on here. I just saw Michelle Walker. Is that Michelle Walker? My friend Michelle. Is she on this panel? Or is that Michael Walker? Anyway, there's some vocalists like Michelle, and I'm trying to think of some. I have a whole list of notable vocalists that have come to the club and are now kind of gone on further. Paul Ballenbach is another. He's a guitar player from Washington D.C. who, when I first met Paul, he was playing out in front of the Red Balloon. Which was on the corner of Blues Alley and Wisconsin Avenue. He was playing on the street. I listened to him and I said, "Who is this guy?" And he was with me for, I guess, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. We went to Spain and played New York and all this stuff. But there are some really absolutely incredible players. Charlie Young, who spent a lot of time with me in the early on, and Warren and the bands back out. Unfortunately, we lost Tommy Williams about a month ago, and I'm trying to figure out how to do a program for him. But there are some. Charlie is really, I believe, today, in the way that he approaches jazz music. He's the conductor of the Duke Ellington Orchestra and the Smithsonian Band. And I was lucky enough to have him for, I'm going to say, 20 years. And we did some work together. But he's a person that nationally, DC-wise, is one of the best jazz alto players in the world, to me. I don't know. I've never played with anybody better. I've never seen anybody better in today as music. So I would, in terms of players that are, and Charlie's an educator. He's a professor at Howard University. So I would think somebody like of that caliber and that sort of class would be good. Like Mark Carey's, he's kind of he's on the national circuit. I just saw him. He's in Tacoma Cafe or Station or something this past week.
I know that there are a number of the ones that you just mentioned that, could really do justice on that stage. I would love to see sort of a DC all-star there.
Yeah,
there's so many great artists.
on that level that we could do.
So I think who comes to mind for me is
James King's another one.
Right. Right. But for me, who comes to mind is I'm thinking Christy DeShield, who's just
I was just getting ready to say
Carol DeShield.
Yeah, Carol DeShield's
he's great.
daughter. I also think about like Steve Arnold, who's this fantastic bass player. He performs as a sideman, but he's got a fantastic sound. And, you know, just to see, I'm thinking of building like this whole 5 or 6, you know, Luke Stewart bringing his group. So you'd have this mixture of all the different ways that jazz has just become such an umbrella for personal improvisation. You know, so to have Luke Stewart come and do something really special there, you know, have Sarah Hughes, you know, and all the great things that Sarah has just.
Well, Sarah and Luke are both members of the Volcanic Ash. I mean, bring that
so bring Volcanic Ash.
Got 7 players that are all DC.
That's
all of that caliber.
That's so right. Absolutely.
And it's the kind of music that would float there.
That's right. I also think about Joe Brotherton and what he's doing at JoJo's. You know, he's really creating quite a movement over at JoJo's. You know, Herb Scott and the great things that he's doing over at Mr. Henry's. So really thinking about Carter Barron being sort of a coalescing venue and just having all the different pockets that makes this scene in DC so vibrant. Have a weekend with it. All you're doing is, Gene, is bringing together some of DC's finest to the stage. That's something that would
and Kevin Toney. I'm in touch with Kevin a lot over the years, and used to present him. But Kevin Toney, who was the drummer for the Blackbirds?
Kilgo.
Keith Kilgo's.
We presented. Kevin Toney did this Andrew White tribute during the festival.
I mean, he's just a wonderful pianist. Kevin
That's
Toney.
right. You know, another person I'm thinking about to see outdoors that we presented last year that would be fantastic is Samara Joy.
Yeah.
You know, she has the ability to sell 4,000 seats. So
she does. There are quite a few actually.
Robert Glasper and the ways that he's weaving in,
Esperanza Spalding.
Esperanza would be.
Somebody taking these notes.
Yeah, listen, you know, most of these people at one point or another have done. So it's kind of, I'm just listening. Esperanza is just doing great things. She's such a
she's
a great musician, and it gives the music a lot of thought and integrity, I would have to say.
Right. You know, Dick Smith and what he's doing at Westminster Church, you know.
He's another one.
But to bring and let him come and do just something special with all of his friends, I think would be
Well, I also think that we need to be looking at affording free events, because the 4,000 nut and talking about that does limit who's there, but it doesn't limit the size of the audience. And I hope that at least once every season or twice a season, something spectacular would happen where there's no ticket sales at all. That it's a first come.
Say it again.
Or it's distributed. Because most of the workshop projects we did, those were free, because people did bring their families. They brought their picnics. I mean, that was one of the first tailgating venues in America,
I think. I think it tailgated right into the venue.
Hey, Gene, this is Claude. I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
That is, hopefully once we start having these concerts, one of my concerns is the surrounding neighborhood and what kind of possible pushback we get from the neighborhood. Because I know for a fact, because I'm also a tennis fan, that when they built the new tennis stadium, there was a whole lot of pushback in the neighborhood about the crowds that were coming. And I think one of the things that has to be considered is kind of managing the neighborhood response, and particularly now, because I think times have changed, and I think unfortunately, people's attitudes sometimes about those events can be a problem.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Claude. Just for everyone's benefit, Rock Creek Conservancy, we're the friends group to the park. I sometimes describe us as the fun auntie. You know, we throw the parties, we bring the gifts. And then when it's time to clean up, we go home and and leave Brian as the manager of the park to do the actual day-to-day operations of things. So I'm actually going to ask Brian to respond to that question, because it would be the National Park Service that's making the decisions about the operational plan for the Carter Barron, and would certainly the Carter Barron Alliance will assist and help share news, but ultimately it's the National Park Service that manages the amphitheater.
Sure. So Claude, I mean, you mentioned the tennis tournament, and I think one of the things we're seeing and have seen the last couple of years is, you're absolutely right. You know, the community is concerned about people parking on the street, parking in those areas. We have tried to do a better job in the last couple of years of kind of reaching out on the front end. And I don't know if you saw, but if you're aware, but during the tennis tournament, we worked with DDOT and the city to, you know, make sure that there was basically an area, about 8 square blocks. Actually, I take that back. It was 16 square blocks all total, that were blocked off from people being able to park there. That assuaged the community in regard to their parking situation. Also, one of the things that's changed since the last time we did shows at the Carter Barron is rideshare is a much more prevalent than even taxis. So for the tennis tournament, we use the driveway for the Carter Barron as a location to drop off people. We would probably need to consider something similar to that as well once the Carter Barron was open again. And then there's also the issue of, you know, there are about 700 parking spaces in
the lot there.
In the lot there. That's a size that's some, but not a ton, right? I mean, and you know, more people have access or tend to drive places, but we also have more micromodal transportation options as well, between bike shares and things of that nature. And the good old S-Bus still runs like water most of the time. So, you know, that is an option. I mean, we would be, as we get closer and closer to reopening, one of the things that we'll have to work with the city, with whomever the production company is going to be, is collaborating with DDOT, collaborating with Metro, collaborating with the AMCs and the city council to make sure that we, you know, ruffle as few feathers as possible, and at the same time, make sure that we're as accessible as possible. One of the key tenets for the Carter Barron is us being accessible to the public as much as possible. And accessibility ranges from, you know, being able to get in and out of the place comfortably, regardless of your mobility, to, you know, being able to allow people to get to the Carter Barron who may not have a car, or maybe can only get there via car or rideshare or something of those nature. So factoring all that in to our planning will be paramount.
Right.
And Brian, can you describe just a smidgen? You wouldn't just make a decision and it would be done. NPS uses public engagement processes to give an opportunity.
I mean, there's not much that we do for the National Park Service that doesn't wind up having some sort of public comment period. So as the facility gets closer and closer to being reopened, there will be input from the public. As we start to planning for shows and things of that in the future, we will seek input for the public. There will be opportunities for everyone to provide their feelings and their thoughts about how we should go about managing that space, because ultimately it fails if we don't make sure that the public feels as if they were heard in regard to from everything from programming to access.
Yeah. One of the things, Brian, that I've heard, and certainly you've heard me say this loud and clear, is that economic accessibility is a really important tenet to the operation of the amphitheater. But another thing that I've heard a lot of people share is just that whole experience of getting there and leaving was part of that. What I heard some of the panelists tonight talking about, that community feel, you know, from you all this evening talked about, the experience of getting your tickets at the record store, but, I've heard about people going to the hot shops on Georgia Avenue afterwards for dinner. And, you might wind up having dinner with someone who you just met walking out of the amphitheater who you never knew before. And it, I think the transportation challenges are also an opportunity to think about how places like the Carter Barron can really build community in the city.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sunny, this has been just absolutely fantastic. Thank you for moderating such a wonderful panel. Gesundheit, Claude. Bill Warren, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope that this is the first I could listen to you all tell stories for quite a while, but we do have to go home and go to dinner. So let's give a big round of virtual applause to our panel, and Claude's got it. And earlier this evening, Brian said you're not here to hear him talk, but on November 16th, we do invite you to hear Brian talk. Brian will be hosting a conversation as the next Race History in Rock Creek program with author Rolf Diamant. The program is entitled Race History in Rock Creek, Civil War Reconstruction and the Rock Creek Park Reality. It's going to be a really fantastic discussion of the history and the origins of the National Park Service and how some of that manifests into the way that Rock Creek Park operates. So a lot broader than just the Carter Barron, but maybe Brian is a vocalist, so maybe there will be a little music in the evening. There will be now.
Why would you put that out in front of these talented musicians? No.
There's some collaborations for you, Brian. I got you. Go.
All right, everybody. I got to jump.
It has been a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Jean, for doing this.
Oh, our pleasure. Enjoy Rock Creek. It is looking beautiful right now.